priorities. You're a trusted, valued member of this committee, and
Thank you, Mr. Maniero. And I just want to again say thank you for your time and effort on behalf of the state of Connecticut. I really appreciate the countless hours and dedication you provided to our state over these last few years, the friendship that you've provided me, and the incredible work that you've done for our committee over that time. And we're going to miss you, but we wish you the best on the future in front of you, and we're excited for the opportunities that you have. And with that, I pass it over to my co-chair, Senator Haskell.
Thank you so much, Representative Lamar. And I just want to pick up right where you left off, which is to say that it's been such a joy and an honor to work alongside Phil Maniero. I'm so excited to see what you do next. And thank you for being such a generous friend and helping me learn the ropes on the Transportation Committee. For those who don't know, and I think most probably do, Phil's had, on top of being our clerk, a very time-consuming side job, which is being a law student. And I've got more and more sympathy for all that he was going through, trying to juggle late night hearings and also exams at the same time. While we're doing thank yous, I also just want to thank DOT for their tremendous amount of work on the Connecticut State Rail Plan. It really is a thorough and complicated document, one that I enjoyed digging into. I know many of my colleagues and constituents did as well, and that doesn't come together without just an incredible team of colleagues over at the Department of Transportation. So we're so grateful for what you do and all of the work that went into this plan. Why are we here today? Rail is hugely important in the state of Connecticut. It transports 43 million people every year and 2.9 million tons of freight each year. Investing in a 21st century rail system is really vital from the perspective of economic development, as Fairfield County knows all too well, but it's also a core part of our state's strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and alleviate traffic on our highways, both of which are addressed in this plan. Section 13B-200A charges this committee, along with the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, with reviewing this plan before it's submitted to the federal government. Per statute, the Connecticut DOT submitted the plan to our committee 60 days before providing it to the federal government. In compliance with state law, we're holding this public hearing with 30 days, within 30 days of receiving it. And in this role, our joint committees are acting as the State Rail Plan Approval Authority in Connecticut. Now, I just want to close my opening remarks by saying nobody has a better sense of how to fix our rail system than the folks who rely on it every day to get to work and to get where they need to go. So I'm really excited that at the end of this rail hearing, at the end of the Q&A session with legislators, there will be an opportunity for public comment. And although it took a little while to get us started up, it's so helpful for the communities that I represent that they'll be able to participate without having to come all the way to Hartford, but from the comfort of their own home, workplace, perhaps even train. That being said, I think now we will turn it over to the Department of Transportation for a presentation on the rail plan. But before we go there, oh, of course, Representative Cheeseman, I believe you're on the line, and we wanted to afford you the opportunity to provide opening remarks as the ranking member of the Finance Committee. Thank you so much for being here. Representative, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Out of practice here. I just want to thank you for everyone for being here today. I want to wish Phil the best, although I didn't have the pleasure of working directly with him. And I look forward to hearing the presentation of the State Rail Plan and diving deeper into it. Thank you very much, Senator Haskell.
Thank you, Representative Cheeseman. I don't see any additional chairs or rankings on the line. Please speak now if you are there. If not, I think we will at this point turn it over to Commissioner Joe Giletti. Thank you so much for being here and good to see you back in the building, sir.
First off, it's nice to be back in the building, okay, and it's not our first meeting today. Let me just tell you from my standpoint, what an honor it's been to not only be working with this committee, but all the way through this pandemic, the meetings that we've had out on the railroad. You know, you've brought a number of the representatives out onto a drawbridge to go and see how that drawbridge was being worked on, how the work was going on the Waterbury line, the work that kept going on all the way through the pandemic. And, you know, it's truly a testament to the dedication that these committees have towards making sure that what we're doing in the department is not only needed, but recognized for the work that was done. So when you've gone through everything from learning about that to learning about how we use drones. So I do appreciate all the support that has been given from the committees for here. So Senator Haskell, Representative Lamar, Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, Representative Cheeseman, and distinguished members of the Transportation and Finance Committee. As Commissioner of the Department of Transportation, I'm here today with a team to present the State Rail Plan overview. The State Rail Plan is a federal requirement and will be submitted to the US DOT, as you've heard. Development of the plan started in 2021, and we are excited to present an overview today. Sitting with me today is Deputy Commissioner Garrett Eucalito, Rail Administrator Rich Jankovich, Assistant Rail Administrator Yuri Kulgis is on the line due to other issues. Members of the CDOT Rails and Policy and Planning teams, Jay Young, Robert Bell, Dave Elder, Elise Greenberg, and from our Government Relations Office, Ian Kleza. And we also have someone you might recognize who's a special advisor to the DOT, Carlo Leone, former senator here. As you know, we have had some staffing challenges that I've come and talked to you about before. And we actually lost our public transportation bureau chief because he got offered to run a system down in Texas. So we're very proud of the fact that he's recognized for his abilities and he's running a system down there. And, you know, from our end, you know, I have to turn around and commend Deputy Commissioner Garrett Eucalito for stepping up and leading the Public Transportation Bureau. And thank you to, you know, our new hires who've jumped right in and are doing a great job. You're going to hear a lot from the team about our plans and accomplishments over the last several years. A lot of it you've been part of and you understand, and what is coming up. So I'm not going to steal their thunder, but I do want to highlight a few things. We are gaining national recognition for the Governor's Time for Connecticut initiative as we speed up trains, reduce travel times, and improve services. There are nearly 50% more trains running on the Waterbury line, and new express trains between New Haven and Grand Central provide the fastest trains in a decade. We've launched the M8s, and some of you were there for that announcement, and are working hard to get them to run from Penn Station to Rhode Island. And I must thank our federal and state officials for the continued support of our rail systems. The funding investment is at levels I have never seen in my 50+ years. And we're grateful to strong partnerships we have with Amtrak and Metro North. And I'd like to thank our phenomenal rail partners as well. Rail services and projects have many layers and many players. I'm incredibly proud of the role that Connecticut DOT plays in improving and enhancing our rail system. Thank you again for giving us this opportunity to present the State Rail Plan. We welcome your questions following the presentation. And now I'm going to step away so that the people that truly have worked on this can explain it, but I will be here so you can question as to whether or not I understand it. Thank you. All yours. Thank you. Except for my water.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Bell. I am a director in the Bureau of Policy and Planning at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. And thank you all committee members for having us here. We're here to introduce this draft state rail plan and to give a general overview of it. It is a very long document with a lot of information and analysis in it. We're hopeful that our overview today will be helpful. I want to let you know a few reasons why we have a state rail plan, and some of the primary reasons is that pursuant to the Federal Railroad Administration, which I will refer to probably as the FRA, uh, that having a state rail plan better positions the department and the state for funding opportunities with FRA. A rail plan that's consistent with FRA's guidance allows us to score better when we submit applications to the FRA for their review. Also, while the Connecticut DOT has prepared this plan, and certainly for state infrastructure and services, the plan also includes projects and information for Amtrak and the private freight operators and other entities, because the benefits there is that it allows, when those entities themselves apply for funding with the FRA, plus other entities, for instance, it could be the councils of government, they also apply, they can refer back to this plan and the projects and information in it, and that also better positions them for their funding applications too. I had a little more introduction here about why we're here, but I think that was covered very well in your opening remarks. Just one thing I want to add to the public comment opportunity here today is that there's also a public comment opportunity that continues throughout the month of October for anyone who wants to submit written comments for us to consider prior to us submitting the final plan to the FRA for their review. And you'll hear more about that in a little bit. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And this was the slide that was should have been up when I was just giving those remarks. So I'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So one of the things we have in our draft state rail plan is our vision statement, and that is to facilitate a robust and vibrant rail system that is safe, connects communities, generates sustainable economic growth, helps build energy independence, and provide links to travel corridors and markets within and beyond our region. Next slide, please. The draft plan also goes over our important goals that we have for state rail in Connecticut. And I won't read through this entire slide, but the major components or the major goals that we have, of course, number one is safety. Also system reliability, mobility, economic, and sustainability. Next slide, please. The draft plan includes some examples of accomplishments since the last rail plan was published. And a few of the highlights of those accomplishments are the CT Rail Hartford line being launched in 2018 for service from New Haven to Springfield. The component changeout building at the New Haven Rail Yard. The CT Rail e-ticket app for Hartford Line, Shoreline East, and also our CT transit tickets. A second platform constructed at the New Haven State Street Station. A positive train control installed on all passenger rail lines, and that's a very important safety measure throughout the state. Also, the installation of 4 passing sidings on the Waterbury line that provides for a much more efficient operation on that branch line. And finally, the M8 equipment now operating on Shoreline East, which provides a cleaner run and a more comfortable ride for passengers. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Elise Greenberg, also from the department. And thank you.
Thank you, Robert, for the introduction to the State Rail Plan. My name is Elise Greenberg, and I'm a supervising transportation planner in the department's Bureau of Policy and Planning. I'm going to provide a high-level overview of what went into developing the State Rail Plan. Next slide, please. So let's first start off with what the rail plan is and what it does. The rail plan describes the entire state rail network, which encompasses both the passenger rail side as well as freight rail. It describes trends and forecasts and identifies needs and opportunities. It also articulates a vision for the freight and passenger rail system. We also describe the coordination and outreach process that we use to develop the plan. We identify how rail investments can serve the interests of state residents as well as businesses. And perhaps most importantly, the rail plan positions state rail projects for federal support. But it is also important to note what the rail plan is not. It is not a funding program or a service plan or a grant application or capital improvement plan. Those are all separate documents. Rather, the rail plan is reflective of all of the existing planning and projected investments. Next slide, please. As a recap of the summary of the process that we used to prepare the plan, we initiated the rail plan in early 2021 and held in about the end of last summer our first round of public engagement to kick off the rail plan. We held 3 virtual public information meetings, and we also established a virtual public meeting room online as another space to visit and receive more information about the plan. And during that period, we held a 45-day comment period for people to submit feedback and ideas for the rail plan. In 2021 and 2022, we also had engagement with all of the freight railroad operators, and we did this in coordination with our state freight plan as well. And we collected data and contacted them to understand their needs and opportunities. And we did the same with the passenger railroad operators as well in 2021 and 2022. And we have now reached the point, and along the way, we also had outreach with all of the councils of government and presented and provided opportunity for feedback at some of our regularly scheduled meetings with them. And that has all led us to this point now where we now have a draft plan that is complete, and we are doing our second round of public engagement and having this current 45-day public comment period. Once we receive all of the feedback from the public as well as our legislators, we will then take that and incorporate it into finalizing the plan in hopes of being able to submit it to the FRA by the end of this calendar year. Next slide, please. There is a lot that has gone into preparing this plan, a lot of different elements, a lot of different coordination with multiple stakeholders, the public, understanding all of their concerns. We've also looked at trends and forecasts, and we have had to acknowledge the public and private benefits of all of our planned investments. And this plan is also reflective of major initiatives such as Time for CT. Next slide, please. Along the way, when we had all of our outreach, we received a lot of different feedback. Some of the themes that we received from the public touch upon service extensions and expansions and the desire for that, greater connectivity, and that speaks to not just first and last mile investments for other modes of transportation, but also connectivity amongst the existing services, as well as concerns with infrastructure such as electrification. Next slide, please. Some of the feedback that we received when we conducted our outreach with the freight operators touched upon the themes of funding and the concern for being able to fund planned projects. However, the bipartisan infrastructure law does present new opportunities. They also shared some congestion concerns with increasing passenger service and the impacts that that may have on freight congestion as well as construction for projects. But they also shared opportunities, for example, intermodal opportunities for doing rail to truck or truck to rail transfers. Next slide, please. When we did our outreach with the passenger railroad operators, some of the concerns that they shared touched upon the themes of COVID-19 impacts. As many of us are aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has greatly impacted ridership and service levels in the last few years. Also, they address concerns about operator coordination and the need for enhanced coordination among the different operators. And they identified the need and opportunity for enhanced speed and state of good repair. Next slide, please. In terms of the way that the state rail plan is organized, the FRA in 2013 released a guidance document that identified and outlined all of the requirements for the rail plan in terms of content, and they also provided a suggested framework for the format of the rail plan. So we have followed that format, starting with Chapter 1, which introduces the rail plan and provides an overview of the role of rail in our multimodal transportation network. Then when it starts with Chapter 2, which essentially serves as an entire existing conditions of both the freight and passenger side of our rail network. Chapters 3 and 4 outline all of the proposed freight and passenger rail improvements and investments. Chapter 5 then presents an analysis and evaluation of all these investments and ties them to public benefits. And then Chapter 6 summarizes all of the engagement with stakeholders as well as the public that was used and reflected in the preparation of this plan. Next slide, please. I will now turn it over to David Elder, who will provide an overview on freight rail.
Next slide, please. Good afternoon. My name is David Elder. I'm a transportation planner with the Department of Transportation. I manage the Office of Strategic Planning and Projects. My office produces the majority of the statewide planning documents, which includes the long-range transportation plan, the statewide freight plan, which is a required federal document that's multimodal, looks at all modes of freight in the state, as well as this plan, which is limited to just the freight network, but it does include an extensive examination of both the passenger rail network, as well as the freight network. Connecticut's freight network includes 9 primary operators. The Valley Railroad, which is the last bullet you see, actually does not operate freight, but it does have lease agreements that allows freight to operate over its right-of-way. Next slide, please. So we do have an extensive freight network. The network does connect to the rest of New England, as well as the rest of the country, primarily now through Selkirk, New York. Most of the freight that leaves Connecticut and goes west travels north to Selkirk, New York, and from there over Class 1 railroad to the rest of the country. You can see that the majority of ownership is actually privately owned among those 9 different freight operators. The state does own a considerable amount of the network that freight operates over, but we do have a total of 581 miles of freight network. Next slide, please. 2021 and 2022 traffic has nearly recovered to pre-pandemic levels. The inbound shipments have the highest value to tonnage ratio. The outbound shipments have the second highest value to tonnage ratio. Waste and scrap materials have the overall highest value to tonnage ratio. Next slide, please. Growth and the intended directional movements of the freight. Inbound freight tonnage is forecasted to increase by 75%. Outbound rail freight is forecasted to increase by 24%. There is minimal changes expected to intrastate and through freight movements, and the largest forecasted changes in materials are the same in the growth commodities that we see today. So outbound non-metallic materials to increase by 928,000 tons, outbound waste and scrap materials to decrease by 408,000 tons. Next slide, please. So part of the requirements of the state freight plans, the state rail plans, are that you have to link your projects to the public benefit. So what is the investment, and then what is the anticipated public benefit for both passenger modes and freight modes? And one of the ways we do this is by creating types of projects, and then we categorize them, and we do some economic analyses to see what the public benefits are. So there's roughly 9 different types of projects. They go from roadbed improvements. This list is organized by the type of project that the railroads are planning to undertake. You'll see a different graph that shows the short-term projects as well as the long-term projects. The short-term projects are between now and 2026. All the long-term projects is everything that's programmed or envisioned to take place after 2026. So the types of projects, quickly, there's another slide as well, but it's roadbed improvements, rail improvements, installing sidings, bridge repairs, and resiliency. Next slide, please. The rest of the list of the type of projects includes signal and grade crossing improvements, yard and facility improvements, capacity and competition enhancements, rolling stock enhancements, and security. Next slide, please. And so this is where it all comes together, and we take those projects and we look at the benefits or the program impacts of those projects. The effects are grouped into 9 different categories. Some of these have been consolidated just for the slide, but it's benefits to the state's transportation system, the public and private benefits of the operations, rail capacity and congestion, transportation system capacity, congestion, safety, and resiliency, local transit, highway, aviation, and marine modes of freight, environmental, economic, and employment impacts. Next slide, please. I will say that this is only a snapshot. The section chapter 5 of the freight plan goes into lengthy detail on those project benefits and the project types. Appendix F of the plan does include every single project that we received from the freight operators to date. We actually have received some additional projects since we released the draft plan, and we're going to include those. But I would just direct anyone who's more interested to learn more to look at chapter 5 and Appendix F for a lot more detail. So in the short term, you can see the project funding by type is largely going to track and bridge projects. That's the pie chart on the left. The second largest category is control systems, followed by facilities and equipment. On the right, you can see that track and bridge investments long range after 2026 are the largest category for future investments. Next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Rich Jankovich to discuss the passenger rail section of the plan.
Thank you, Dave. Good afternoon. My name is Rich Jankovich. I'm the rail administrator for the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Today, I will present the passenger side of this presentation. Next slide, please. The Connecticut Passenger Rail Network includes intercity passenger services operated by Amtrak on the Northeast Corridor and the Hartford Line, Connecticut Rail services on the Hartford Line, as well as the Shoreline East. Metro North operated services also on the New Haven line. I'd like to provide some more details on each of these. The Northeast Corridor. Amtrak operates the service between Washington, D.C. and Boston, which connects to Hartford and Springfield, Massachusetts, with shuttles and regional trains. CT Rail Hartford Line services between New Haven and Springfield. CT Rail Shoreline East services between New Haven and New London. The New Haven Line corridor, we'll go into some details with that next. Metro North Railroad services include the New Haven Main Line from New Haven to New York City, New Canaan Line between New Canaan and Stamford, Danbury Line between Danbury and Stamford, as well as the Waterbury Line between Waterbury and Bridgeport. Next slide, please. A deeper dive into the intercity services. Unique in that of the Hartford Line is intercity services that provides longer commuting type trips. In conjunction with Amtrak, MassDOT, and the Vermont Department of Transportation, these markets are served between New Haven to St. Albans, Vermont, as well as from New Haven to points south. Next slide, please. Commuter services on the New Haven line between New Haven and New York City is operated through our agreement with Metro North, the amended restated service agreement. Connecticut's service rail network also includes the CT rail service on the Shoreline East between New Haven and New London, as well as operated under a contract by Amtrak. Next slide, please. Connecticut's annual Amtrak ridership was seeing steady growth leading into the onset of the pandemic in early 2019. Ridership on the New Haven line was relatively stable leading into that 2019 date. On the Shoreline East, the ridership is directly related to the need to shutting down services to improve the line, although ridership was bouncing back into the early 2019 before the pandemic. 2018 marked the inauguration of the Hartford Line service, which showed dramatic growth leading into the 2019 date. 2020 and 2021 ridership on all lines were hit hard by this pandemic. Next slide, please. Referring to this chart, you can see that the impacts of the recovery from the COVID. So I'll break this down by the lines. With respect to Amtrak, 79% of the ridership has returned as of April since the 2019 peak. Looking at additional data from June of 2022, I'll go and talk about the Shoreline. The Shoreline was 30% of the actual ridership in 2019. The Hartford line was 78% of the ridership of 2019. The New Haven line is roughly about 61% ridership of 2019, and then the branches of New Canaan, which was about 50% of that ridership of 2019, Danbury branch, 46% of that ridership in 2019, and Waterbury line, 73% of that ridership in 2019. Next slide, please. Looking ahead, we anticipate the ridership will continue to recover from the pandemic lows and could more than double by the 2035 on some lines with the robust service possible with the planned Time for Connecticut investments. The slight dip in ridership on the New Canaan line is evident in the attached. Okay, sorry about that. I'll take it over again. The slight dip in the ridership of the New Canaan branch between 2035 with or without Time for Connecticut reflects that some riderships shifting to the branches closer to their origins that will have improved service in the Time for Connecticut service plan. Next slide, please. So these are some Amtrak projects. So our department, on behalf of the state, is supporting the replacement of the Connecticut River Bridge along the Shoreline East. Amtrak and the department applied jointly. We're awarded various state of good repair grants from the FRA. The department also has been working very closely with Amtrak on the interlocking improvements. These interlocking improvements will help with the operation of the Shoreline East and the Amtrak service. Safety is the top priority for us. Amtrak and the department continues to improve the safety aspects at all of our grade crossings. Next slide, please. The Enfield, we're going to talk about Connecticut Hartford line. So the Enfield station, construction is scheduled to start in 2023 and with the completion of 2026. Windsor Locks has been awarded and the construction will be starting very shortly. We had the groundbreaking and was scheduled to be completed in 2025. North Haven Station is under design with a design completion of 2024. West Hartford is going to be a design completion in 2023. We're also going to be doing some what we call this phase 3 double track covering what we use on the railroad mileposts. So from milepost 33.4 up to 35, as well as another segment. There's 3 segments, section of 46.6 up to 48, and then further up on the line. Construction is scheduled for the double tracking to start in mid-24 and completed in 2026. Also, we'd like to talk about the Hartford Union Station. The department has just completed the replacement project of the roof, and that was completed just a few weeks ago. The design for the station and its relocation, a very large endeavor going into the future, will begin in 2025, and with the construction anticipated to start in 2028. Next slide, please. Now we'll talk a little bit about the Shoreline East projects and stations. Madison Station, North Platform and Pedestrian Bridge connection to parking anticipated to start construction in 2027 with a 2-year timeline. Shoreline East power supply, additional utility supply points for that 40-mile segment between Branford and New London. Construction is estimated to start in 2035. Passenger information display systems, we're looking at upgrading the information displays on all of our state-owned Shoreline East and Hartford Line stations, designed starting in 23 with an anticipated construction of 2025. Next slide, please. New Haven Line projects. As far as the time for CT and the infrastructure, the department has been upgrading the railroad system. We are in the process of replacing our movable bridges and replacing our open deck structures with ballasted deck bridges to increase travel speeds. Our other projects will upgrade the signal and communication systems along the railroad, improve the stations by replacing aged concrete platforms, improving wayfinding, and making our stations more accessible. We are also focused in Stamford by completing the master plan for the facility that will help the department enhance the station for the future. Our goal is to reduce travel time and increase speeds along the railroad in a safe manner. Additional New Haven Line projects. As we stated in the previous slide, the design for the time capital projects is ongoing. Time 1, as we refer to it, is a railroad block between Bridgeport and Stratford, and that's underway in design. There are a total, like I said, 5 time projects. Time 2 is located around the Walk Bridge segment and will be in construction next year. Segment time 3 is in design. Time 4 is in planning, as well as time 5. All of these are going to increase speeds out on the railroad. We are also performing interim repairs on our movable bridges to the bridge replacement until the bridges are replaced. We want to make sure that the safety and the state of good repair conditions are maintained at all times. And lastly, phases of the Walk Bridge are currently under construction. Next slide, please. Our branch lanes are also undergoing various improvements. All the Waterbury line station platforms will be replaced. All but the Waterbury line platforms are low levels at this time. All will be replaced with high level platforms. The Waterbury branch was just upgraded with a new signal system as well as positive train control. The Danbury line is also being improved with the Merritt 7 station coming to completion shortly. The project replacement of low-level platforms and high-level platforms. Other improvements include slope and track stabilization projects. Next slide, please. Just to reiterate, the goal of the rail capital program is to save an overall 25 minutes of travel time by 2035. That means that the commuters will save up to 82 hours a year in their short term and up to 148 hours in the long term. As we complete our rail projects and continue planning for the future, the system will improve reliability, will attract service and new riders, and will be ready for the new increased capacities. Other important benefits include customer experience. Projects have been initiated studying the improvement of Wi-Fi accessibility on the fleet for Metro North, Shoreline East, and Hartford Line. A program has been initiated to review conditions at all stations, determine deficiencies that will lead to the design of the projects to improve ADA accessibility throughout each facility. The state and Amtrak are both initiating projects qualifying for grade crossing elimination grants. Next slide, please. This chart is a representation of the funding levels for the next 5 years. We depend on both state and federal funding to help our infrastructure in a good state of repair. As stated in the slide, approximately 70 to 80% of the total funding is on the rail side. Next slide, please. Operating funding varies for each of the 3 lines as presented in the slide. For the New Haven line, including the New Canaan, Danbury, and Waterbury branches, the funding sources include fares, state and federal subsidies, federal congestion mitigation, air quality, or what we call CMAQ funding, is also available from fiscal year 2023 to 2025. This is to offset the additional costs associated with the increased Waterbury line service. For the Shoreline East, state and federal funding and are important subsidies to offset the relatively low fare revenue. Finally, the Hartford line, which was both Amtrak and CT rail service, is similarly funded with a combination of passenger fares and state and federal funding. Of note is our estimates to receive federal funding through the COVID Relief Act. The funding is only expected to be available through 2025. We'll need to work with the legislature to address additional funding gaps. Next slide, please. The department has been regularly collaborating with the Northeast Corridor Commission with the 2035 plan. The department is currently working with them to develop a project list that will make Connecticut available to receive billions of dollars to upgrade our infrastructure. The department also participates with the New England States Regional Forum, meetings with our neighborhood states discussing all of common goals towards improving transportation, not only through the state, but within this region. And we actually had one of our meetings this morning with all the states. All states were represented. We have strong working relationships both with the Northeast Corridor, MassDOT, Rhode Island Department of Transportation, as well as the Vermont Transportation. At this point, I'd like to turn it back to Elise.
Thank you, Rich. Next slide, please. We've now heard a lot about the contents within the plan, the proposed projects, the existing system, and the process that was used to develop the plan. I'd like to take a moment to point out that we still have our virtual meeting room space that is up and available, and you'll see in I think about 2 slides the link to that. You can also visit the DOT webpage on the state rail plan to see a link to the virtual meeting room as well. But that virtual meeting room affords an opportunity to provide comment. It also shows a draft of the plan. There are different stations throughout the meeting room with different pieces of information. And this presentation will also be posted to that. Next slide, please. In terms of next steps, again, this presentation today will be posted on our State Rail Plan webpage, as well as this virtual meeting room. We are meeting next week with the Councils of Government at our regularly scheduled meeting to provide a more direct opportunity for further discussion on the draft plan. This current public comment period remains open until the end of October. And there's actually this QR code on the right-hand side of this slide. Will lead you right to a short survey that provides the opportunity to provide public comment. And we will take all the feedback that we're hearing today, as well as the public comment in this period of time that's submitted to us, and we will look at it, review it, and incorporate it as best as possible in finalizing the plan with the hope of sending it to the FRA for their review and acceptance by the end of this calendar year. Next slide, please. So I want to thank everyone for their time this afternoon. This slide shows the links to our State Rail Plan webpage, as well as the virtual meeting room and the contact information for submitting contacts or comments, as well as questions. And again, thank you everyone for your time, and I will turn things over to the chair.
Thank you very much. I want to thank every member of your team, Commissioner Giletti, for coming here today, each individually presenting this to us. For members of the public and even legislators, and frankly, 90% of the people who are going to read this plan, you're probably going to want to focus in on chapters 3, 4, and 5. This is really exciting stuff before us as a state. We have incredible opportunity now to actualize a lot of the things that we've just been talking about for the last 20 years. And we're in an incredible moment where we can start to move forward so much of the thinking and planning and and thought that's gone into a long-term transportation plan for Connecticut. And I couldn't be more thrilled with the team that we have here to execute that. It's an incredible opportunity for the state as a whole. What you just mentioned at the end, I think is paramount. This public comment period will remain open until the end of October. So folks can go right to DOT's website and pull up the Connecticut State Rail Plan, review it there. Legislators have full copies available to them. Members of the public can access those documents on that website or on ours, and provide feedback and comments to the DOT within that time period. And they have committed to considering and taking that feedback throughout that process before submitting the final plan to the federal government. Now, it doesn't mean we're all going to agree on some of those comments, but they'll at least consider as we move forward. With that, I'm going to move over to Senator Haskell and then Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you very much, Representative Lamar, and I echo your thanks to the entire DOT team for that thorough presentation. I have a million questions, but I'm going to try to limit it to just a few out of respect to my colleagues, and then perhaps circle back after they've had a chance to ask some as well. I just want to start with what Representative Lamar referenced, which is this unique historic moment that we're living through with regard to the influx of federal transportation dollars. In Chapter 2, page 36, this plan talks about the FAST Act, which gave 5 years of predictable formula funding, far more than Connecticut had previously anticipated. And of course, the bipartisan infrastructure plan makes the FAST Act seem tiny. I guess my question to your team is, what lessons were learned from the last major influx of federal funding? It seems from this plan as though most of that increase went to funding state of good repair projects. I assume that now provides us an opportunity to go further and invest in enhancements. But what are some takeaways from the last federal influx to make sure that we're best able to use this new federal money?
Well, as you know, with the last influx, when I first came to you, it was over the fact that there was so much work that had to be done and so much infrastructure work that hadn't been worked on that it caused a series of delays. So at the same time, we were being asked to look at how could we accelerate the rail system. We were trying to dedicate as much money as possible to go and taking care of those areas where we had the most delays sitting out there. Since we've now gotten an increase of almost 40% for the next 5 years, it has freed up money to be able to, again, not only look at what we were doing in infrastructure, but as you know, we've kicked off recently Windsor Lock Station. We went down to Clinton to put another station in down in Clinton. We are doing the cleanup on the catenary job that was finally completed. It has allowed not only an investment into the infrastructure, but we came across with a time for Connecticut, which also allowed us in other ways of looking at how could we accelerate through our territory. And we've formed tremendous partnerships with Amtrak because a lot of the federal funding that's coming in is coming into the Northeast Corridor. We're a major recipient on that, and it's going to allow for a lot of growth. So where you saw us talking about the fact that we supported them on Connecticut River Bridge, they also supported us in getting us additional funds for Walk River. So what has been different now is that it has truly opened up the ability to go and negotiate, go back in with our federal partners. And I will tell you that we just closed out our budget on last year. We have been successful at drawing down every federal dollar that was available to us. We will again go after any additional federal dollars that are left on the table anywhere else, because we have the ability, thanks to this legislature, thanks to a governor, to go and match funds going forward. So it has truly been a change from the standpoint that we're now not only just fixing things, it has allowed for the vision to be able to look at going into Penn Station, to be able to do things like taking the M8s and putting them over on the shoreline, to free up that equipment to go on to the Hartford line. As we're looking at the Hartford line, we're also looking at whether or not Amtrak in the state of Massachusetts are going to do the inland route going across from Boston over to Albany, which will allow us other opportunities as we look at how do we maximize the efficiencies of the Hartford line and tie that line as well as our New Haven line into going into Penn Station. So to say that it's been a game changer is putting it mildly. We really now have gone beyond the standpoint of just fixing things to having vision and moving it forward and tying that vision in to the vision that the legislature and the governor wanted us to look at. Garrett, anything you want to add to that? Okay.
Hard to add to that. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for that answer. That's inspiring to hear. Deputy Commissioner Euclid may roll his eyes because he knows I'm a little obsessed with this next topic, but Wi-Fi was brought up sporadically in the report and in the presentation as well. There's reference in chapter 3, page 13 to a 5G program. And then not until chapter, I think it is 5, on page 14, do we see sort of an explicit reference to Wi-Fi. Can you walk us through what those plans are, where we are? This legislature, of course, in the last session appropriated some amount of money to expand 5G availability. We also know that there's some hardware issues that need to be thought through. An RFP may have been issued or an RFI from Metro North. So just an update and timeline on the Wi-Fi project, if you don't mind.
Sure. So Garrett Euclido, Deputy Commissioner at Connecticut DOT. Right now, we don't have a definitive timeline. The technology is very difficult to use Wi-Fi in the M8 trains. Amtrak has found this to be the case, where you have a single point of distribution for the Wi-Fi signal within a rail car, and you cram a large number of people in that one spot. It's similar to if you try to use your cell phone at a stadium or a concert, you get really terrible service, right? So MTA has issued an RFI for information from the telecom companies to see what a solution may be. We have consultants working with us to determine what would be the best solution, whether it is Wi-Fi or whether it's satellite signal, but that comes with the cost. There was funding provided to us in the budget that the legislature passed and the governor signed to give us resources to effectuate the plans. It's currently under study, though. We are trying to work with the telecom companies to potentially deploy more 5G small cells within the rail corridor. That's been a struggle. Doing any work in the rail right of way is very difficult and it's expensive. But our team's working with AT&T and others to try and get more cellular coverage along the rail corridor today.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. As a regular Metro North rail rider, I think solid cell service would be a huge improvement. Wi-Fi, I suppose, can wait a few more years, but I'm glad to hear that those right-of-way issues are being worked out. I'm going to try to limit myself to just one or two more questions because I see there are hands raised. There was reference, Rich, I think you mentioned earlier that there is a sort of funding gap that will need to be completed in 2025. And big picture, obviously, this plan lays out a really ambitious spending agenda, and one that I wholly support, and one that seems necessary to bring our infrastructure into the 21st century. The report also outlines the facts that most of those dollars come from the Special Transportation Fund. Now, a few months ago, the legislature decided to enact a temporary gas tax relief that costs about $1 million a day, but it was in recognition of the fact that people are paying a lot more for gas, were paying a lot more for gas than they were accustomed. Now there's sort of ongoing conversation about whether or not that should be extended. And I guess my question to you is, if the STF isn't full, if we are continuing to take $1 million a day out of the STF, is it realistic to say that that would limit some of this agenda, that some parts of the time for CT plan would be less achievable on an expedited timeline? Sorry, Deputy Commissioner Euclido.
So there's two parts of public transportation. There's the capital program, and then there's the operating. We can build things. In Connecticut, we use bond funds to pay for our capital program, and that is then paid back through the debt service payments out of the Special Transportation Fund through the legislatively appropriated funds. So as we increase the federal funding we receive, we have to increase the amount of state match that's going to go. So the feds increased 40% additional transportation funds, which is going to go towards infrastructure. We will need to increase our funding at the state level to match that. At the same time, providing public transportation uses appropriated funds. So if we want to increase service on any rail line, it will increase costs to the department, which will need to be appropriated to us. So it is going to be a balance. We're going to need to look at what the Special Transportation Fund can absorb in the future if we want to expand services on any of the lines in operation.
Just to make sure I understand that last point, if I may, increased federal funding doesn't mean that the state can take a step back, but rather just the opposite. More federal funding creates an obligation, or at least an opportunity for more state funding. That's basically correct?
Yes, yeah. If we want to use those federal dollars, there's a state match associated with it. And in fact, there's the 38% increase in total federal funds, formula funds. But then when you look at the rail side, there's $26 billion up for grabs along the Northeast Corridor for investment in rail infrastructure. And we're going to go after every penny we can get our hands on. So that's going to require a match as well.
Well, it's not exactly reassuring to hear, but it's important to, I think, clear up that misconception that it might exist in this building. My last question for now, and then I'll circle back after, is Penn Station access is mentioned in this plan, and it's something that's incredibly exciting to my constituents in Fairfield County. I think early on in the report, maybe in chapter 2, there's a statistic that says something like 6.8% of Fairfield County residents rely on rail to get to work, whereas it's around 2.9% statewide. So I have the privilege of representing some towns that are especially interested in the future of rail transit, and especially interested in getting to that side of Manhattan. Even if the trains aren't getting faster overnight, being brought to the Penn Station side of town will ultimately cut their commute down. Can you provide, obviously this is an ongoing source of conversation with other states, and I'm sensitive to that, but any sort of updates or reassurances? I think the report seems to indicate that would be Penn Station access via the Hartford line. And I just want to make sure folks in Fairfield County know that, or I guess I want to make sure it is the case, that folks in Fairfield County will also have access to that new Penn Station program.
So first, let me tell you, back when I was the president of Metro North, we knew that out of everybody going into Grand Central, 40% of them were going down to Wall Street, but 20% were going over to Penn Station. So we knew what the market was. And though the market has changed through the pandemic, you're talking a new market when you're talking the Hartford line. And the reason that we prefaced it with the Hartford line is Amtrak is already providing a service on the Hartford line. And we were negotiating with Amtrak to provide some of that service to go through to Penn Station. So it will give us access into Penn Station with Amtrak as a partner, as well as working on our MTA access, which has been ongoing all the way through. So even though you've heard it referenced that way, it did not, what we're looking for is an increased opportunity for more trains to go in. And yes, the market that we know is available right now, or was available pre-pandemic, was from the existing ridership that was on the New Haven line going down. So we have not lost sight of that. We are working on that. Sure.
Senator, I just want to add one thing. The commissioner and I are part of the Northeast Corridor Commission, and Penn Station access, in order to get additional Metro North service into Penn Station, will require significant capital upgrades. And that's something that the Northeast Corridor Commission is working on, us and New York, as well as Amtrak. There will need to be capital upgrades along that line. And hopefully that can be funded through the Northeast Corridor funding, that $26 billion pot of funds. So we're actively pushing for that to be included in the list of projects.
That's spectacular. I think a few months or maybe a year ago, people would have asked why we wanted to get to Penn Station, but the new Penn Station is increasingly beautiful. And I think my constituents are even more excited about that. So anyways, thank you so much for your work on that. I do have more questions, but Mr. Chair, I will yield to others who have their hands raised.
Thank you, Senator Haskell. Representative and Ranking Member Cheeseman, followed by Representative Meskers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, both chairs. I do have some questions, obviously. First of all, when I look at the per passenger, per line costs, can you break down the subsidies per line? I'm looking at my Shoreline East. If I've read this correctly, I believe it's showing $500,000 in revenue, 27.5 million spent by the state and 1.1 million from the federal government. That seems to be a very significant subsidy. But if you could, break down per line the per passenger subsidy that's provided, please.
Representative Cheeseman, we don't have those per passenger subsidies with us at this hearing.
Okay, could you send them to either Bree or Phil to be shared with the people on this call? That would be great.
Yep, we will.
Okay, looking at some of your figures, both in terms of your projections for passenger traffic and freight rail traffic, at what point were those projections created? I know even in 6 months, we're looking at a very different economic forecast, both short-term and long-term, and I wondered at what point these projections were created.
So these projections were modeled. We used the Northeast Corridor model to look at existing services, and then we created both a high and a low growth scenario. The projections, there's two sets. One goes from 2022 to 2035, and then there's another set of growth projections that go from 2035 to 2050. All the projections are using the Northeast Corridor model. There's a detailed discussion of the projections in the plan, and I can find out what that section is and make sure that you get that.
Okay, I'm just curious as to, were these prepared 6 months ago? Are these a year old? What are you, basing them on? Because as I said, we are looking at very different economic conditions, both in terms of the cost of borrowing, projections of a possible recession. If these were prepared a year ago, even based on those Northeast Corridor forecasts, we may be looking at a very different picture going forward.
Hi, this is Robert Bell from the department. The projections were made within the past 6 months as the plan was being developed. They are based upon 2019 numbers in terms of ridership, at least. In terms of economic forecasts, we did not attempt to look at the various potential economic outcomes over the next year or two or three. But one thing we did do is, in terms of some of our projections, is we did provide a sensitivity analysis within the plan, especially for ridership projections, due to the fact that it's very hard, or there's no crystal ball in identifying what the future may bring. There's many variables that will affect that. So we did put in a sensitivity analysis for a low, medium, and high set of future variables.
Okay, thank you. Because I do think as we look forward, obviously no one has a crystal ball and things can change, but I do think it's important to take into account what may or may not happen. And I'm final because as I say, I see other people have questions. I'm looking at your sustainability. Two questions there, and then I'll let somebody else ask. I know at one point, several years ago, there was a plan to move the shoreline rail through with Amtrak and totally change the course to go through Old Lyme and New London. One, has that plan been totally put to rest? Because I know there was significant concern in my area about how disruptive and destructive that would have been of some of our very historic properties.
This is Garrett Euclido. So that was, there was not necessarily a plan. The Federal Railroad Administration had kicked off a vision exercise to look at potential routing for true high-speed rail in our country. And that, I know, was the issue in southeastern Connecticut. There was a route that was proposed that would have gone through several communities, as you mentioned. That was never a Connecticut DOT plan. What we are a part of is on the Northeast Corridor Commission, in partnership with Rhode Island and Amtrak, as well as the Northeast Corridor Commission staff. We will be participating in a New Haven to Providence study as to what capacity can go through that corridor and any potential tweaks that can accelerate speeds through that corridor.
Okay, and final question under sustainability, opportunities to expand the use of alternative fuels. Are we looking at hydrogen, replacing electric with particularly with the freight lines with hydrogen fuel cells or something like that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so we are kicking off a study that is going to look at whether we can, in a fiscally efficient way, re-electrify the Danbury, Waterbury, and Hartford lines. To get off of diesel equipment on those lines. We've already moved to electric train sets on Shoreline East instead of diesel equipment. But the rail industry is looking at hydrogen potential for rail if you don't have an electrified line. California is currently testing renewable diesel, which is essentially used diesel from a restaurant.
So biodiesel?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit different from biodiesel. It has more energy compact than biodiesel. So the rail industry is testing that in California. So there are some alternatives there to lower the carbon footprint, even if we cannot electrify all the lines.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Lots of questions, but I'll defer to everybody else. And if you could get those per passenger, per line subsidies and circulate them to the committee, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you, chairs.
Thank you, Representative Cheeseman. And thank you, Representative, for highlighting. I'm certain that there'll be a lot of questions from legislators who are both in attendance today and who may be viewing this at a later date. Again, the public comment period is open until the end of October. DOT staff and officials will be available to help us answer questions or understand any of the detailed programs or investments that they seek to make during that time as well. The Finance and Transportation Committees jointly have the responsibility to evaluate this plan before it's submitted. That's the opportunity we're taking here today, but it doesn't end today. We have some time over the next few weeks to sink our teeth in more if there are any questions that are not answered today. Representative Meskers, followed by Representative Michelle, and then it looks like we'll move into our public comment period at that point.
Thank you very much, Chair Rowland. I guess I have a question, a comment, observation to the committee or to the Transportation Commissioner and the group. I'd like some follow-through commentary from both, I guess, the Siting Council and from our major utilities. You know, I sit on transportation, I sit on finance, so I'll see it from the financial point of view. I'll be looking at it very closely. I'm also on energy and technology, so I heard the commentary on Wi-Fi, the difficulty of the access, et cetera. I would like a comment from our major carriers, both electric and the other utilities, as well as the cable fiber optic lines. As we're doing the project, particularly as we roll out the 20-year program and the money we spend, I want to know where we have requirements for access, where we would envision or they would make requests for conduits, and if there's opportunities and rights of way when we're doing some of the development, particularly like if we're electrifying a line. I'd like to know whether we can grant a right of way to compensate for some of the expenditure to some of the utility companies. I want to make sure that as we rebuild our rail network, we're not essentially either cutting off or limiting expansion of fiber optic or some of the other utilities. So I'd like, I guess, not a sign off from the Siting Council. I'd like commentary from the Siting Council on the utilities about your development plans and where they would see bottlenecks or where they would like to get involved for a right of way, because I'd like to make it a comprehensive infrastructure development that way.
Thank you, Representative Meskers. I think you kick off a really important conversation about right-of-way monetization in a variety of different formats, whether it's through our utilities or land adjacent to train stations, highways, and rail beds. I think we, as a state, would be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't evaluate all potential monetization of those assets. I don't know if the commissioner or deputy commissioner have any response with the specifics of Representative Meskers' question.
No, I think you've stated it well. Obviously, we're always looking at opportunities to offset our costs. So there's nothing that's off the table. So I'll leave it at that and say, I'm glad you brought it to our attention. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to follow through, sorry, Roland, if I might, just so that I would expect by the time we're finished the program that I have those commentaries from those relevant utilities about where they're trying to get into and what they want. So we can basically make a comprehensive review. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Meskers. Representative Michelle, to be followed by Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the DOT presentation and all the work that's been done. By the way, I did grow up using the TGV train in France, so I've been always been very interested in trains and railroads. My first question would be on the improvements on the rails. And I might have missed something and I haven't had time to review the plan before this public hearing, but is there any precisions on upgrades on cars? And I'm sorry if I missed maybe a piece of the presentation on this.
Representative, are you referring to rail cars?
Passengers.
Yeah. So not on the New Haven line. The M8s are the newest fleet we have in the state, and we continue to receive M8 equipment. The final set should be received in the next year or two. But we do have an RFP on the street right now for new rail cars for the Hartford line. We're awaiting responses, which should be received by the end of this year. Then we'll select and award a contract and get those in service in the next 5 years. So we will have new rail cars serving some of our diesel branches with the opportunity for electrification in the future. We're also pursuing acquisition of dual power locomotives to allow both diesel operation as well as electric underwire operation.
Thank you for that. And so if I understand properly, you can upgrade certain models of cars without certain upgrades on the rails, right? So the upgrades we're doing on the rails, will they be on the entire network? Will they be enabling us to move to newer vehicles or cars, sorry, passenger cars, more modern cars throughout the entire network?
Through the chair. First, Representative, great questions, but I want to remind you that the M8s, when we put the M8s out, we're the latest in technology and an extremely unique vehicle that's out there. Matter of fact, every other line when I was the president of Metro North wants the M8s on their lines. They have electric charging stations at every one of the seats. When they put the brakes on, the same way as in a vehicle that recharges its batteries, the M8s return power into the overhead line. It is the standard right now that everybody's trying to achieve. So when you say, upgrades to the line will turn and allow for a greater ability to use cars, we're only using the M8s at about 80% of their capabilities. They have the ability to go well above 100 miles an hour. So what we're trying to do now is get our railroad up to be able to meet what we've already designed for in terms of the M8s coming out there. And when we go after the new cars, okay, which again, we are going to be able to use them on the Hartford line. And as we go through electrification of other lines, the lines that haven't become electrified yet will be able to use the cars there. And it also allows us the ability to have escape equipment if we ever end up in a storm again that blocks all your electric equipment from operating. So I want you to know that everything we did was looking at what are our alternatives, what provides us the best alternatives. They again will be high-speed cars that are going in. And I didn't get a chance to say it before, but even when we're looking at the locomotives, right now Amtrak is experimenting with a hybrid locomotive that can operate on not only using a diesel or an electric operation, but will run on battery. And they're looking to see how far they can have those locomotives run on batteries. And the freight industry is looking at the same thing. We're in the midst of a major change, and we're trying to follow that as we're making our investments going forward.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense. Much appreciated for this answer. And then just earlier, I heard some comments and on a couple of occasions about small cells installation. Not to take too much time on this, but in this public hearing, is it possible for DOT to send me more information? Why small cells versus 4G? Where will the small cells be placed? Are they going to be on the tracks or in the cars? And considering what's happening with the FCC, just was wanting to make sure that everybody's doing the due diligence on public health. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Michel.
Thank you.
Representative Farrar, to be concluded then with Senator Haskell.
Thanks, everyone. So nice to see you in person and those on Zoom too. As a member of the Finance Committee, I don't get to talk transportation as much, so I'm thrilled to be here with some of my transportation colleagues. Just a question to many of you who presented. We heard in depth, as you noted, about a range of passenger rail improvements, and as someone who represents West Hartford in the Hartford region, was thrilled to certainly see them highlighted on the presentation. But I'm curious if you all could kind of share a little bit about how you're thinking about kind of the Hartford line station improvements overall in timing, and how that fits with the double tracking project that you're also proposing. And if there's any guidance you would give to kind of communities as we're trying to kind of think through how you're prioritizing those projects together.
Thank you, Representative Farrar. So it's a great question because the federal funding that's available through the Northeast Corridor State of Good Repair Program, the $26 billion I referenced, they prioritize major backlog projects, which are really, we are actually listed in the infrastructure bill that passed. Our 4 movable bridges are listed, as well as the Connecticut River Bridge owned by Amtrak. And then below that, they have improvements to the existing infrastructure. So we believe that our double tracking, finishing double tracking on the Hartford line will qualify and we're pushing to get that included, as well as upgrades to the New Haven line. So when we look at the Hartford line advancements in the future, we have a few priorities. We'd like to take advantage of those federal funds, finish the double tracking, but we also want to pursue opportunities to make the corridor safer. In our country, we continue to have problems with vehicles crossing over into the railroad tracks and getting struck by trains. No fault of the train engineer. In most cases, it is a car will try to go around the gate arms that are down. And that's something we want to try to prevent. So we are looking at an opportunity to do what's called a sealed corridor with some potential detection systems that will alert the trains if there's a vehicle in the crossing well in advance of them visually seeing it. And correct me if I'm not doing the right technology, Joe. So that's something we'd like to also pursue next in conjunction with double tracking. We think there are some potential grant opportunities for that. If we do that, that enables communities up and down the Hartford line to pursue what's called a quiet zone designation. So the trains wouldn't necessarily have to be blowing their horn as they are required to under federal regulation, which I imagine you may get calls about that sometimes from constituents. I know we get complaints about that. And then we're continuing to design the stations along the corridor, but those under the FRA guidelines, those were deemed the lowest priority for that $26 billion. So in terms of trying to prioritize investment for federal funds, we put the double tracking, the safety improvements. We're continuing to use our state funds to finish the designs for the stations. And then once those designs are concluded, we'll see if there are federal funding opportunities for construction in the future. I know I've spoken to your mayor about opportunities to maybe utilize the private sector to help monetize some of the assets around there to help pay for the construction. I think that's a conversation the town of West Hartford, CROG, and DOT need to continue to have, because that may make it an easier path forward.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just really helpful to kind of understand the full scope, both around safety and increasing stations and the economic development angle. So I actually just had one quick thing, because I didn't notice it in the report, really around economic development and kind of the benefits from transportation investment with our state's economic development. Is that something that you all have looked at from an analysis that you could share with us as a committee as well?
Yes, so I touched on that very briefly, but there is a lengthy discussion on the project. So we are required to assess our program in accordance with the public benefit, and part of that public benefit is the economic benefits of improved service, additional stations, which includes more ridership, as well as the secondary and tertiary impacts of the retail that kind of pops up around those areas, and the housing that has the potential to pop up around those areas. So that is taken into consideration. If you look at our program effects, there's a whole chapter for the economic impacts or the public benefits of the program, as well as an appendice that explains how it was done. But yes, we absolutely do look at that, and it is one of the requirements of the FRA guidelines for how you prepare a state rail plan.
Excellent. Yeah, because I think as legislators, the more that we talk about this is just like a comprehensive investment and the dividends that it'll pay, not just in regards to how we move ourselves, but also with our economy, is really beneficial for us. So thank you all for answering those questions. And I know myself and other legislators just continue to look forward to be partners with you in our communities. So thank you. Thank you to the chairs.
And thank you, Representative Farrar. Senator Haskell, and then we will close the question and answer period for legislators and move towards public comments. For those of you who have signed up on the public side to testify, our administrators are sending you links to promote you as panelists. Please accept those links. That way you can get into our room and I can call you by the number that you signed up. Senator Haskell.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. My follow-up question have to do primarily with the branch lines. Representative O'Day reached out to me this morning. He unfortunately had a commitment outside of the building and couldn't attend, but he wanted to make sure that this plan provides meaningful improvements for the New Canaan branch line. My reading is that there are sidings provided, which is a big step forward, but in some of the tables, chapter 5, page 19, it sort of conflates the New Canaan branch line with the rest of the New Haven lines. So I'm wondering if somebody from your team might be willing to sort of spell out the New Canaan branch line specific improvements that we might see so that we could pass those along to Representative O'Day.
It's Rich Jankovich. As we presented in there, the first phase of the work would be going after the sidings on the New Canaan. And then as we go further into that analysis and looking at some other potential projects of the future, we definitely would be doing that too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rich. And while we're on the branch lines, if I could just follow up on the Danbury electrification. It's mentioned it's been mentioned today in the presentation. It was mentioned repeatedly in the report. But when you go to the appendix and you see sort of the funding timeline laid out, I only see 12.5 million allocated for improvements on that Danbury branch line between 22 and 26. I don't know nearly as much as you all about what the cost of electrification will be, but I have to imagine that it's going to be far greater than $12.6 million. So why the discrepancy there?
So we're just beginning the study for the electrification of all 3 lines. We have no estimates at this time to insert. Since this is a plan being submitted to the federal government, we would need to include some solid engineering estimates as to total cost for that project. So it is a very preliminary beginning. We've assigned it to a consultant. It's underway, but we don't have any costs to insert at this time.
Okay, that makes sense. So we shouldn't misread the fact that it's blank to mean that it's actually going to be a probably very large number. On the Danbury branch line, within Chapter 5, at one point there's a reference to a 25% increase, I believe, in the number of trains that are running. But then later in the chart on page 19, it seems to say that there's no increase in service or capacity for the Danbury branch line. I just wanted to confirm that it's the former, that there are going to be more trains on that branch line.
I think we showed 2 different ones. There was one without the time for CT investments and one with the time for CT investments. I think that may be the discrepancy there. So if we make all the investments that are being proposed through time for CT, that would enable those increased frequencies.
Okay, that's really helpful to know. Thank you. I apologize that all of my questions have a Fairfield County bend, but one other for you is that freight is repeatedly referenced as an opportunity to help get trucks off the road. It's good for the environment and it's great for drivers. Of course, folks in Fairfield County suffer, I think, disproportionately from traffic jams. How much of the freight opportunity in terms of offloading the shipment of goods actually exists in Fairfield County as compared to other parts of the state? Are there viable freight lines that are going to help to alleviate traffic on 95 and 84? Even the Merritt, well, not the Merritt Parkway because there are no trucks, but as compared to the other parts of the state, which maybe have more freight lines?
So you're absolutely right that one rail car can accommodate roughly 3 truckloads of the equivalent. There's also a statistic that the Connecticut Freight Rail has eliminated 193,000 truckloads in a given year from being on the highway. So it's very clear that, yeah, the additional rail freight has potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce the wear and tear on our highway system. I could defer to others in terms of opportunities in Fairfield County. There are experts here on the system itself, but my understanding is that there is so much passenger demand in Fairfield County on the May line that accommodating freight can be a challenge. And I'll defer to others if they want to expand on that.
Good afternoon. So Rich Jankovich again. To Dave's point, that's what we'd like to do more of, is get that freight down there. There are opportunities right now in the West Haven area that there is freight movements. There's one that's we're looking at in the Stratford area. And as we head further down towards, your area that you were making reference in Fairfield. So again, it's the network of integrating that as well as the operation of moving freights and the capital program that we're trying to pull off, because we made a lot of reference about this capital program. If an investment, which we'd like to do to bring more trucks off the road, to integrate that system of operations in this program of these movable bridges and everything out there, we also want to work that into that whole analysis. We do modeling with the passenger side, RTC modeling. That's how you can look at how the movement of everything's working out there. But as you know, freights are moving larger, heavier, and slower. So that can be an impact, but that would be more things we would take out. But a lot of things are play into that whole analysis when we're looking at freights and integrating it in there. We'd love to do it, but also there's a big passenger move, as you know, and a regional move, because we've got a lot of regional coming through our state, and we want to move, as you made reference earlier, down to New York or up to Boston. So all that becomes part of that analysis, Senator.
That's helpful to know. Thank you, Mr. Jankovic. And don't move the mic away just yet, because I have one more question for you while you're
Well,
going.
Can I jump in for a second?
Of course, Commissioner.
Yeah,
please.
because one of the things I wanted to point out is that no matter what we talk about, there are freight rights that go across there that still exist that are being negotiated. There's also been a lot of discussion, and without my giving up anybody's future plans, there's talks on inland ports. There has also been some takeovers of some of the freight lines that are here. So it's an active negotiation that's going on right now. And we're well aware that it's in our best interest to accommodate both the freight and the passenger services going through, and they do have the rights to it. So I don't want to lose that perspective. As much as we know that it's hard to put them in with such a tremendous demand on the passenger side, there are rights that exist that go beyond whether or not we'd like to make it all passenger or not.
That's helpful to know.
Would it be all right if I add one thing to the freight discussion in Fairfield County? So I have the benefit of also preparing a statewide freight plan, which is multimodal. It's also out for public comment right now for anyone interested. One of the things we have found through engaging with some of the freight operators is that right now, the growth in Fairfield County of barge movements in some of our harbors that aren't, they don't have the depth for large ships, we are seeing a tremendous increase in the amount of bulk materials that are coming in and out of the small harbors in Fairfield County. And that seems to be a growing opportunity to be able to move materials by barge, and they're going up the Hudson River all around New York and down into New Jersey, all by barge, and there's an opportunity for growth there.
That's exciting and something to keep our eye on. So thank you. And that's a great flag about the freight plan being out for public comment at the moment as well. While we're on freight, you know, I learned a lot in this report about the history of private freight rails eventually being abandoned or shut down, and sort of some heroic efforts by DOT to try to preserve those rights away and get it back going. There was some chatter in the news lately about privatizing Metro North, which I'm not even sure what it means or if it's possible under the shared operating service agreements. But public transit isn't profitable, right? There are even the 43 million rides a year on Metro North pre-COVID levels. It still needs an enormous state subsidy in order to survive. So just as a somebody, Commissioner, who's been in the rail industry for a long time, have you ever seen profitable rail? And if it were privatized, is the likely outcome that stations would be shut down or that the line would discontinue operation altogether, as we've seen in some of the freight lines?
Well, you know, I still remember being the superintendent on the New Haven and Harlem and the argument that was made over whether or not we should have the Waterbury line going. If it was made just on a business decision, okay, we wouldn't have a Waterbury line and we'd be trying to rebuild it today. So everywhere that we've let rail go, we're now trying to put rail back in, the Hartford line being another example of it. So when you say to me, has there been any privatization that has worked? Yeah, there are some of those, what I will call commercial train buff lines that make some money. The only system not internationally, Japan turned around and gave up all the property around every one of the stations to a developer that would go in there, develop the property and operate their high-speed rail trains. They have put in shopping malls, they put in, you know, hotels. That is how they're offsetting the cost of doing the operation, how they're able to claim that it was privatized, but it was privatized by basically what we call the public-private partnerships, where you then take the land use that's around and you are able to capture the increased value of that land use to offset your operating costs. In terms of it all, yeah, going all the way back into the 80s, I was asked whether or not I would go on a private venture, and it was out in California. And they're always looking at the most profitable line. So if you were going to take Amtrak, for example, and say, what part of Amtrak do you want? Guess what? Okay, it's between Washington and Boston because it's the one area that's the densest, that has the greatest opportunity for increasing the fares, because you can actually charge higher fares than the airlines can. Okay, but in the overall, would the rest of Amtrak exist if you privatize just that one section? Because all of it would require a subsidy. So no, I've not seen a model yet that shows that you can privatize because even when you privatize, the same way that you sit here as a legislature and we have to look at what is the investment that we're willing to make into the freight side to make sure that freight is working as efficiently as possible, as well as passengers working as efficiently as possible. And that's going to be the question going forward. So it's always going to be, do we have a way, and I think somebody else asked the question before, as to whether or not we look at what our economic opportunities are. And that's what we're always looking at, and we look at stations in the future, we have to be looking at not going in and condemning properties so that the town loses the tax base. You have to look at whether or not we can turn around and capitalize on the investment opportunity and have some of that investment come back to the state to offset the operating cost. So I would say to you, though there's been a lot of talk about privatization, first off, there are New Haven rights that we call on all the time. We go all the way back to New Haven. I didn't start with New Haven. I started with Penn Central. We do have some rights going in, but at the end of the day, I would not welcome the discussion to try and privatize Metro North between what we would go through with New York and Connecticut in terms of, what that would mean, as well as New Jersey when we're talking about the West of Hudson service. Are there constantly ventures that go and look at it? Yes, and I'll be more than happy whenever these ventures come up to go and send you what the latest proposal is on it. But I personally do not see at this time, but again, I do have my biases too, and that's why I think it's good public policy to be involved in making sure that what you're doing is providing the best transportation modes going forward. I hope I answered in a way that
Certainly, that was a fascinating answer. Thank you, Commissioner. And I think I share your sentiment that public transit needs to be public in order to benefit the public. Just one last question, and then we'll move over, I believe, to public comment, and it's for Mr. Jankovic. I every once in a while bother you in your office about scheduling, and there's reference in chapter 2, page 23 to the zone scheduling strategy that's in place. I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity to increase public input, especially as we start to see on the Danbury branch line and the main New Haven line increase service, increase capacity? Is there a greater opportunity for the public to weigh in on scheduling? The way it seems to work from my point of view, I'm sure there's a lot of analysis that goes on between your team and Metro North. When a constituent has a complaint, usually I forward it over to you guys. Presumably you guys get in touch with Metro North. A few months later, there's a change, and I'm grateful for that. But I want to figure out if there's sort of a more inclusive way we could be building these schedules as more trains become available.
So when we look at schedules and propose schedule changes, we do it twice a year. When it comes in to us, we look at it first, but we actually brief the commissioner's office and we make recommendations on what those meanings really mean, because what it gets down to is with slotting out there and what we have for capacity, we have to weigh all that into this. Yes, we would like to have those, but then also, as you know, these trains are also connecting to stuff coming off the branches and stuff that we're, as we introduced the Hartford line and the Shoreline. So as we're looking at it, we do that analysis. Yes, we would be open and would work. We always address your concerns when it comes into our office, my office, at the Office of Rail. But the other thing too is when we introduced the express trains, we spent a lot of time looking at how those 3 trains in the morning and 3 trains in the afternoon really work out there. I was just on one this past Monday going down to New York, and the times we spaced them out from 5 until 7 in the morning and in the afternoon. We're taking what we're seeing and we're looking at that as well. But again, it gets into how we analyze all of this back to what I made a reference earlier in an RTC modeling. It really has to all fit together and be cohesive.
Through the chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Jankovic, and Commissioner, of course.
You were specifically talking about the public's involvement in it, and you, as a legislature, you created a commuter group that we meet with all the time that also has input into us. If we make a major change that affects more than 10%, we have to hold public hearings on it. And, anytime a change goes in, we get an awful lot of public feedback, and then we sit down with Metro North and we go through it. But I also wanted to go back, you've whet my appetite, and I want to go back at you for a second. I want to emphasize the fact that, the airline industry is very heavily subsidized. Our highway system is heavily subsidized. Not everybody looks at it that way when you're looking. Everybody talks about how expensive it is to go and use the rail. Who's paying for the air traffic controllers? Who's paying for all those fields that are out there? So there is another discussion to be had when you look at it, because it's not just what goes on here. It's a public policy in terms of our national policy and how do we afford these things and how do we keep it going forward. So I look forward to being able to have those type of discussions, because I always find it fascinating when we get into this, because awful lot to talk about as we talk about what the new future is going to look like.
Couldn't agree with you more on that, Commissioner, and well put. And thank you for your points on public input. I know that the Commuter Rail Council was instrumental in providing feedback in terms of this rail plan, and I'm sure they will continue to provide feedback. Out of respect for everybody's time, I'll now turn it back to Chair Lamar, but thank you each so much for taking the time to answer these questions.
And again, thank you to every member of the DOT who was able to join us here today and add to this presentation for our joint committees. We'll open it up to the public comment section of today's agenda. For folks who are online and wishing to take part in the public comment portion via Zoom, please accept that invitation that you've received from our committee administrator. They'll be sending them out again, so please hit accept so you can join us. On our public comment list today, first I have, and I think Elliot, you're up first. You'll be someone who has got to accept that invitation. Elliot Wareham, Harry Martindale. Elliot, if you're in, we need you to accept the invitation. Harry Martindale, same thing. If you're in the room, we need you to accept that invitation so that you can join us on Zoom. While we wait for those, we'll move to Jack de Oliveira. Jack, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Jack.
Thank you, Chair Lamar, and also Chair Haskell, Ranking Member Cheeseman, distinguished members of the Finance and Transportation Committees. My name is Jack de Oliveira, a Transportation Planning Assistant with the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments, and we thank you for the opportunity to offer comments today. We understand that we have—
Jack, just so you know, and there's no obligation here, but you, your video is not on. So if you'd like to appear on screen, please turn on your video, but it's no obligation to you to do that.
No, I apologize, and it should be coming on.
Thank you, Jack.
Of course. So as the federally designated MPO and regional planning authority for the Naugatuck Valley Planning Region, the Naugatuck Valley Council of Government staff is committed to ensuring equitable access and mobility for all our residents. Through the Valley's history, rail has been a central and critical component to our transportation system. And as such, this plan will have a lasting impact in economic development and quality of life within our region. Our staff applauds CT DOT for their committed efforts on updating this plan, and we provide several comments for consideration below. We understand that we'll have multiple other opportunities to offer comments, so I will go ahead and be brief with these comments today, but we will have a longer and extended version of what we are looking for to submit later on. So to just talk about the things that we enjoy about this plan, the electrification for full passenger rail is vital to our state, and we applaud the DOT for looking at this. Most importantly is the impact for environmental. We see that in our region, there is several negative environmental impacts, specifically because our environmental justice communities lie along the rail lines. As such, electrifying these lines offer additional opportunities and program dollars into several of the state's Justice 40 communities that are most impacted by the transportation system. And we believe this will further develop economic development along the line. Additionally, we have several concerns that we see with the program, and we like to offer a list of projects that we could see along the Waterbury line that are not included, but we encourage the CTDOT to look at these projects. One would be a commitment to the replacement and expansion of the rail fleet service along the Waterbury branch line. Currently, equipment is old and subject to frequent breakdowns and lacks amenities that passengers desire. One of the things that we spoke about was Wi-Fi. That is one of the concerns that we have. This action includes replacing existing locomotives with modern, energy efficient, and clean dual-powered engines, and this equipment would be required to ensure reliable service. Additionally, commitment to rehabbing stations along the Waterbury branch line and construction of new station buildings is something that we are looking forward to. While the state rail plan does include the installation of high-level platforms and associated amenities at legacy stations along the line to provide accessibility for all users, the needed actions include more than just high-level platforms. Better passenger waiting areas are needed along with better pedestrian and bike connections to nearby downtown areas. Additionally, there is a lack of acknowledgement of micromobility to comply with Executive Order 21-3.
Excuse me, Mr. De Oliveira, you're at the 3-minute marker. If you could start wrapping up, please. Thank you.
Of course. So alongside of looking to comply with Executive Order 21-3, which is limiting climate emissions, we look at micromobility. And lastly, we just want to talk about freight possibilities. The Borough of Naugatuck has developed a proposal to build an inland port along the current line and bring shipments into New York via import rail. This project has been identified as a regional priority in the metropolitan.
Excuse me, Mr. De Oliveira, just again, you're past the 3-minute marker.
Of course. So I would just like to wrap up there saying this project is vital and it is in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And then we look forward to offering more comments later, and we appreciate all the work that DOT and legislature is doing to address rail. So we appreciate that once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack, for your commentary today, and we'll certainly be reaching out to you to get further information as this process proceeds. Next up on our list, and again, we have Elliot Wareham, Harry Martindale, John Burnick, still hoping to have you accept your invitations to join today's hearing. Next up, who's in the room is Jillian Gilchrist. Representative Gilchrist, are you available? Representative Gilchrist, are you with us? This process is going to move much quicker if people don't start accepting their invitations to join us in the hearing. Representative Gilchrist, going once, twice, and we'll come back to you in a few moments. Elliot Wareham, Harry Martindale, John Burnick. Okay, Jacob. Jacob, if you want to just take that seat right there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob Knowlton. I come to you today as a resident of Newington, Connecticut. I had something written, but you know what? I don't like it anymore, so it's fine. I'm just going to go about this brief. Bear with me. I don't have as much polish as a lot of y'all do, so this could go any which way. Growing up in Newington, and I currently still reside in Newington, has been a little bit frustrating. The only way to get around is by car for the most part. It's a little annoying, and I'm a little tired of having to get in my car to go to work, get in my car to go home, get in my car to literally go to the store right down the street. And the other week, my car was stolen. So I currently am trying to navigate the public transportation sector right now. Unfortunately, along Cedar, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Newington, but along Cedar, there isn't a sidewalk there or pedestrian access. So it's a little annoying to have to walk in the middle of the road with cars going about 60 miles per hour because they ignored the 45-mile speed limit to get to the fast track in the first place. We are very grateful that that's there. So one comment that I would have for this plan is if we do go ahead with a station in Newington, which I am in full support of, I would like to see a little bit more pedestrian access in terms of allowing people to actually get to that point. Because I know, at least for myself and a lot of my friends, we can't really get to the fast track or where the station is supposed to be placed. And I know there is a debate on where the station is going to be placed, but I do want to express my support for the location that was initially projected, as this would give potential economic development success and small business ownership support with reliable foot traffic due to the location near CCSU. And it would also give or be a great catalyst for a live, work, play development as well. I know that I'm not an individual who wants to have the single family life with a bunch of kids running around in a big house. So having that station there would be pretty cool to see where Newington goes with it, to develop maybe apartments and other things like that. I also want to express that not everyone has the ability or resources to spend all the money on cars and this car infrastructure. It is very, like the commissioner said, it's very expensive to subsidize highways and all this car infrastructure in the first place. So I am very pleased to see that this Hartford line is being invested in. There is interest, especially from my generation, to get out of our cars and onto the streets. We want to be more involved, be more of a community. Talk to each other on the train and not have to actually spend our entire days in our cars on our way home. I spend so much time sitting in my little seat. I'm sure I'm going to have crazy back problems when I'm older. But I literally just work on Main Street in Hartford and it takes forever to get home every single day.
Jacob, just a heads up, you're at your 3 minutes. If you could start wrapping up, please.
Yeah. So I just want to say, thank you for giving us the opportunity to explore our home and participate in society without having to invest so much money in cars. I know I don't want to have to go get a new one. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacob. And I know you didn't love your written testimony, but if you want to provide it to the committee and or to the DOT, you have until October 31st to submit to them as well. Thank you. John Burnick, to be followed by Representative Gilchrist. John, are you with us?
Yeah, I apologize. I don't have a comment. I'm not sure why I was invited to be a panelist.
Well, John, that is a mystery to me as well. So we're not going to require you to provide a comment. That's not how it works. But we thank you for attending and joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Representative Gilchrist, I presume you
Yes.
accepted and planned on. Oh,
So I think there was, I'm sorry, Representative Gilchrist signed up for me, and this is Mayor Sherry Cantor. So I apologize, Representative Lamar, for
that's
passing. I was unmuted and ready to go and just waiting. So I apologize for that. Thank you so much, Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner, Chair, Honorable Chairs. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your commitment to the state of Connecticut. I am really, truly grateful for all that you do. I did submit written testimony, so I'm not going to repeat everything. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. And Representative Farrar had asked some questions that were pertinent to the timeline and concerns about the West Hartford station itself. But in global, well, the TOD area that West Hartford actually has really captured through 2 Connecticut Fast Track stations and a rail station that has been, at least in the planning phases and design phase. We have already implemented TOD. We have approximately 300 apartments coming online due to these commitments from the state prior, the investments the state have made in Connecticut Fast Track. And we have people, we have a mixed income, commercial, even a bicycle company firm there. And there's so much excitement along the trail. We have 2 breweries that are very, very close. And so much has happened because of this, this transportation commitment. We also have another development around the corner with 298 units with also 10% workforce housing. And I have spoken with Mayor Bronin, who is equally as excited about this potential West Hartford line rail station on Flatbush. But what I want to also state is that the West Hartford, the New Haven and Worcester rail line is truly an economic necessity for the state of Connecticut. And we are an integral part to that plan. With 20 with 30,000 potential units and significant payback. There was a study done, and the 8 to 9 to 10 million, say $10 billion investment will return $9 to $10 billion for every dollar spent, and that is significant. And I just want to reiterate, the population in the greater Hartford area is 1.2 million. Just as a comparison, Metro Bridgeport, Stamford, and Norwalk are all less than 1 million, and Metro Metro New Haven is 600,000. So we're talking a very significant part of our state that has had an underinvestment in rail, and so appreciative for the Hartford line and all the work that's gone into that, and ready to take it to the next level. And we are truly supportive of this plan, and hope that it is a truly groundbreaking and is significant to the economic success of Connecticut as we think it is. And again, thank you all for your efforts.
And thank you, Mayor, for your testimony, your comment here today. We greatly appreciate all that you've done with respect to ensuring that the state's investment in West Hartford and the transit resources that we've provided there have been maximized. A number of communities haven't similarly recognize that opportunity, whether it's around new stations or ones that have existed for generations. The idea of TOD seems somewhat foreign in some parts of Connecticut, and you've embraced it really well, and I greatly appreciate that. With that, it appears as if no one else who said, oh, here we are, sorry. So if you wouldn't mind moving over to that seat right there, that way you're not going to get blinded by that projector. I don't think we have liability insurance for that, so.
I feel like this is Mr. Smith that comes to Washington. My name is Stuart Calais. I was born and raised in Greenwich, and so I'll give a shout out to Hi Matt Blumenthal. I know you're on that committee, and I sent all of you a note, so put that in the record, the old-fashioned way, a letter. Matt, say hi to your mom. I sat behind her on the school bus 50 years ago, and your dad was the only executive leader who came 20 years ago when I had an event celebrating veterans at the Capitol. And I used to see your granddad on the 6 o'clock Metro North train. He always sat in the same seat, and your grandma would pick him up in the station. So I've used up 15 valuable seconds to say hi, but I'm a people person. I work as a doctor. I've been in Newington for 15 years. That's a quarter of my life. Oh my gosh. But I live, work, and invest in Newington. I love people, but and so I put people first, cars second, and trains third. But it's an overwhelming task coming here because, you know, there's no public here. You guys are in charge, and we've tried to bring public sentiment. Maybe you got some emails, Mr. Lamar. And I think maybe Garrett got some emails over the summer. It's been a summer campaign to let you guys know, however way we can, to say Newington really has got enough DOT infrastructure. We have 2 fast tracks. There's always the thought, oh, let's get a train station for CCSU. We've had 7 years of the fast track. Their enrollment dropped by 35%. You know, a train station's not going to help that enrollment. And so we also have a Newington Junction 1890 depot that celebrates our heritage of railroads. And, you know, we look at it this way. Newington, and I applaud the student who came in, saying yes for the Cedar Street, but if you've lived there 15 years and you live and invest there, you realize that a train station does not make sense for Newington at all. And we just need to take it off the list. And I know that's hard for people to swallow and people are cringing, but let's start to look at it. You know, I wish Farrar was still here. She's probably going to win against Yop in Newington. It's been redistricted and the train station is in her district. But again, it's a cart before the horse. There's a guy named Andrew Souza who lives in West Hartford in her district, and he moved his shop, Souza Group Heating System, into Newington to do manufacturing at 565 Cedar Street. He bought it like 15 years ago. And, there's a target on his back. Hey, we just want a train station. We don't care that you own it, that you pay payroll tax and you pay your property tax, but, we're going to put a train station there. That puts an enormous pressure on him and his family. It takes permits, time, equipment. He's put investments into that building. And all of a sudden, oh, there's a train station. Do you want to ask if maybe you want to buy my land first, or you just want to keep that specter, right? And so I've been fighting for the small business owners and the landowners who work and live over in that Fenn Road, Cedar Street area. So it's very important that you have Farrar go meet with Andrew Sousa, talk to the people who own Beacon Industry next door, where they want to put 44 acres of development. Our town manager just resigned today. He resigned because of public pressure about development in Newington. The people are fed up with their higher taxes, and frankly, they realize that Cedar Street does not need a train station ever. We can go to Berlin train station. I went to talk to the station master in Berlin. He had a beautiful old antique white train station there. He said, yeah, there'll go some ADA improvements. As soon as the track came up to a station, somehow it burned down mysteriously. But we still have Berlin, and nobody uses it, or some use it, but not enough. And thankfully for the mayor of West Hartford and our public campaign, we've advocated.
Excuse me, sir, just as a heads up, you're at your 3-minute marker.
Wherever you are. We have a Berlin train station, and soon Mayor Cantor will have a West Hartford train station. We can take 2 fast tracks to get over there to go to Hartford or New Haven. So we have plenty of infrastructure. Please take Newington train station off the list. And lastly, I just want to say thank you for serving. I just hope that you'll let people, good guys like Gary Turco and Matt Lesser, that please promote these meetings. This is the meeting on transportation, not a whisper on their Facebook page. When Greater Hartford Transit came, it was muted on NCTV and Cox 60. And
Excuse me, sir, once again, you're past your 3 minutes.
And I appreciate it. You sound like the voice from above. Thank you guys so much for listening to me. Hopefully you'll get some emails between now and October 30th. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Doctor, for your public comment. I do believe that exhausts those individuals who have signed up and intended on providing public comment today, and individuals who are in the audience. Is anyone else wishing to provide public comment at this hearing today? I'm seeing no one here in the room or on the Zoom meeting. So I believe that will conclude today's public meeting. Thank you all again. Thank you to members of the DOT for providing insight into the Connecticut State Rail Plan, for allowing us to evaluate at this point. Legislators and staff will take the next month or so to review it in its component parts, and we'll have many questions and concerns that we'll likely bring to you at that point. The public is again asked to go online, submit their comments, make sure that we're hearing from you as we consider this 5-year investment plan. And with that, Senator Haskell.
I just want to thank those who participated today and say that this is probably, I've said this before, so who knows, hope springs eternal. Maybe we'll have another hearing, but this is probably my last hearing as a part of this committee. And it really has been a tremendous honor and privilege, not just to work with my colleagues in the legislature, but also to build real partnerships and dare I say friendships with folks at the DOT as well. So thank you all. It's been a huge honor.
Representative Cheeseman.
Nothing to thank everyone for being here today, and have a fabulous weekend. I gather it's going to be rainy tomorrow. So
yeah, tomorrow's going to be awful, but Sunday will be terrific, I hear. So let's all enjoy what we have of the weekend, and I look forward to seeing everyone soon. Thank you.
Thank you.